For more insight, let's speak now with Nusrat Chowdhury. She's an associate professor of anthropology and sociology at Amherst College. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. So we've seen some remarkable scenes out of Dhaka in the past few days. I mean, what do you think was the tipping point that escalated the situation to this level? And were you surprised by the ouster of Hasina?
Thank you. I think to start with your last question, yes and no. Given the kind of excessive violence that has gripped Bangladesh in the past 2 weeks or so, and the way in which the government seemed really out of touch with what the protesters were wanting, it was obvious to those of us who study and observe Bangladesh and many of us who live there that things could not have gone back to the way they were, the status quo. But at the same time, I think many of us were surprised at the haste in which the events have unfolded. The tipping point, as you say, has been, I think, the violence. And it's not just a tipping point. I mean, the political scientist Ali Riaz has called the quota movement as a spark. It's a spark that started the fire. But there has been a kind of long history, a kind of cumulative effect of grievances and resentment that kind of came out through this protest, which the New York Times just described, as starting as a simple bread and butter issue, which became an oppositional movement, given the way in which the demands of the students and then the ordinary citizens who joined them were dismissed, to a certain extent criminalized by the regime, and the way the protesters were slandered. So I think it's after the excessive violence and the kind of loss that ordinary non-violent students have incurred that made it into an oppositional movement and not just a movement ensuring quota reforms.
Professor, I'm wondering now, how patient are the protesters and in particular the students going to be? They want a civilian government governed by a people's charter. For now, though, what the army chief is promising is an interim government led by the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, as I understand it, in consultation with the president, Mohammad Shahabuddin. The president, as we know, is from the Awami League, and the general himself reportedly close to the former prime minister. So, I mean, are the protesters going to be patient and willing to accept such a temporary arrangement?
Only if it is a temporary arrangement. I think to a certain extent, the military is still seen as a non-partisan institution, but the students have been very clear. They're going to offer their outline for an interim government within 24 hours. And they have just done a press conference earlier in the day. So I think people are also tired. People are also tired of the violence and the uncertainty. So they would like a peaceful transfer of power. But it is also going to be very difficult for the military or any oppositional party to kind of hijack the movement, because from what we have observed in the last few weeks, that the students, came out repeatedly on the street, even when they were being shot at by semi-automatic rifles. So I think if they sense or suspect some kind of old game being played, I don't think they're going to actually accept it this time. And it would be a grave mistake for the military or any other political party to kind of take that faith for granted. But I also wanted to add that this is not a military coup. There are some media outlets that have been describing it as such. It's the military that has come in by the request of the people and the president to ensure a peaceful transfer of power. But even 2 days ago, this members of the military were shooting, at unarmed protesters. So if it's a faith that the protesters in Bangladesh have placed on the military, it's a temporary one, and they will be watching their actions very carefully.
So how optimistic are you that a credible democratic system could be rebuilt? And would you have a rough timeline?
As you know, Bangladesh used to have a caretaker government clause in the constitution, which was actually voided in 2011, and that meant that the ruling party would step down and ensure a kind of neutral force to be in power so that an election would happen properly. In the absence of that, there are many things that are uncertain. But I think from what we are gathering from the students, as well as some of the reports from the meetings with the Chief of Army Staff, that organizing a free and fair general election as soon as possible, creating the conditions for a free and fair elections to the extent that it's possible in the next few months, is the priority of everybody involved.
Professor Chowdhury, this has not been confirmed, but the BBC was reporting earlier that Sheikh Hasina is not actually staying in India, but could be on her way to the UK. Does that make sense to you, given her closeness to the Modi government?
Yes, it's not just that Sheikh Hasina's party or Sheikh Hasina herself has been close to the Modi government. India has long been an ally in many ways of the Awami League. So it's not just the Modi government, but it's not surprising at all that India would at least make sure her safe passage out of Bangladesh. But I would like to say that that Sheikh Hasina has maintained good relationships with the Congress party in India as well. And Indira Gandhi used to be in power in 1971 and had actually helped Bangladesh gain independence from Pakistan in a number of ways. So Bangladesh and India share this history, share a certain kind of affinity, but it is also well known that the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina herself have been particularly close to India, whether it's the Modi government or any other government.
Professor, to what extent then do you expect outside powers like India or the US or European countries to seek to influence over Bangladesh's future direction?
I'm not an expert in international relations, so I would kind of refrain from making claims on that. But I would kind of say something that I think is very important. There's a lot of speculation, kind of geopolitical speculations that are being made. I think there's a kind of cynical way in which it is being reduced to geopolitics. I think the images that you are seeing, the thousands of people, coming down to the streets, not just the students, their parents, their teachers, ordinary citizens, geopolitics was probably the last thing on their mind. So whenever there's a regime shift, some parties, some stakeholders would probably benefit from it. And the US and India are big players, and everybody knows that the US actually kind of declares its presence in South Asia through India. So it's a matter of, we will have to wait and see how this plays out. But at this point, as we are still coming to terms with what just happened, I think it's important to keep in mind that this is not reducible to some kind of simplistic geopolitical calculus. The people have been frustrated. And the kind of barrier of fear that was sustained for almost 15 years suddenly crumble down. And that's what we are watching right now.
Absolutely. Definitely a developing story, but we have to leave it there for now. Professor Chowdhury, thank you very much for your time and for your thoughts. Associate Professor Nusrat Chowdhury is from Amherst College.